For those of you that I have not met, my name is Joanne Drake, and I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation. I've been with the Reagans for almost 30 years this year, so. In honor of our men and women in uniform who defend our freedom around the world, it is our tradition to have you stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. I'd like to welcome our special guests this evening. First, of course, the wife of our speaker and an author in her own right, Callista Gingrich. Also, our former Congressman, Elton Gallegly, and his wife, Janice, are here with us this evening. It's really quite a busy week around here this week. It finally rained in California, thank goodness, and we're probably all still recovering from yesterday's less than Super Bowl. Although our fundraising team is searching for the one person in the country that bet big on the Seahawks and made a killing with the bookies in Las Vegas. We have the annual celebration of President Reagan's 103rd birthday this year with Dr. Bill Bennett on Thursday, and we're hosting PJ O'Rourke this Saturday. And by week's end, we'll all be engrossed in the Winter Olympics, which brings me to this evening. When I realized that this was Olympic week, it hit me that tonight's guest and the Winter Olympics have a lot in common. First, they're each known by just one word, Sochi and Newt, Newt and Sochi, like Cher or Prince or Sting. And Sochi's caused quite a bit of controversy, not unlike the former Speaker of the House. And certainly you can see that there's nothing more patriotic than Newt Gingrich or the streak of patriotism that the Olympics brings out in this country. And when I really thought about which sport Newt might represent, I went down the list of obvious ones. Ice hockey. He's always looking to score one against the Russians. Snowboarding. Come on, if Newt had red hair, he'd remind you of that spirited and enthusiastic gold medalist, Shaun White. And then there's speed skating. Newt sleekly maneuvers close to the ground, racing counterclockwise, ready to break out from the pack in the last lap, like his new book promises, reminiscent of Apollo Anton Ono. But I finally settled on freestyle skiing. Newt has had many careers, and I quite imagine that he has a few more ahead of him. But I have never seen anyone as skilled at the aerials, moguls, ski ballet, and halfpipe that are as much a part of U.S. politics as they are of freestyle skiing at the Olympics. And to seal it, Newt Gingrich has been known from time to time as a hot dogger. Newt Gingrich really needs no formal introduction, but I thought I'd give you some highlights. His own Twitter page defines him as husband, father, grandfather, citizen, small businessman, author, former Speaker of the House, Crossfire host. But of course, we know him to have much more depth than the 140 characters of a tweet. Newt's been heard to say that his heroes are the founding fathers. And no, I don't think it's because he actually met them. Lest we forget, he was also a candidate in the 2012 Republican presidential race. He debated here at the Reagan Library, and he won both the South Carolina and the Georgia primaries. There are those, probably some of you here tonight, who are wondering if perhaps he'll throw his hat again into the ring. As an author, Newt Gingrich has published 24 books, fiction and nonfiction, 14 of them New York Times bestsellers. They cover a range of topics from Valley Forge to Ronald Reagan to Pearl Harbor. And of course, like tonight, he's quite active on the speaking circuit, and he and his wife Callista also host and produce historical and public policy documentaries. One of Newt Gingrich's least talked about, but most natural skills, is as a teacher. He's an expert on world history, military issues, and international affairs. He has both a master's and a doctorate in modern European history, and before his election to Congress, he taught history and environmental studies at West Georgia College for 8 years. He has served as a member of the Defense Policy Board. He was the longest-serving teacher of the Joint War Fighting Course for Major Generals and has taught officers from all 5 services as a distinguished visiting scholar and professor at the National Defense University. To jog your memory a little, Newt Gingrich was first elected to Congress in 1978, where he served the 6th District of Georgia for 20 years. He is well known as the architect of the Contract with America. That led the Republican Party to victory in 1994 by capturing the majority in the U.S. House of Representatives for the first time in 40 years. After he was elected Speaker in 1995, where he served until 1999, it is said that he, quote, disrupted the status quo by moving power out of Washington and back to the American people. I think it could be argued that his new book, and much of the work that he has done in the last 15 years, can be considered addendums to that contract. Newt's new book is entitled Breakout: Pioneers of the Future, Prison Guards of the Past, and the Epic Battle that will decide America's fate. It's a mouthful for sure, but it's chock full of ideas and stories of breakthroughs that could solve many of our country's toughest problems in education and learning, health, energy, transportation, and many more fields. You won't be surprised to learn that Newt talks about how big government can and will delay or destroy these breakthroughs if we don't take action. In this book, he tells us how to recognize a pioneer of the future and a prison guard of the past. He helps us to assess whether we recognize ourselves as prisoners and whether we want to continue to be held as such, or whether we're ready and willing to escape, reorient ourselves politically, and potentially rebuild our economy and our capacity to govern ourselves to become a breakout champion. Newt offers cogent and pragmatic examples of solutions. He calls them transformative technologies, and they are available today. He believes they will supercharge the American economy. A website like the Khan Academy, simple government reform at the FDA, promoting cost-cutting methods like Lean Six Sigma. These are just a few of the solutions that are discussed. I'll wager that once you've read the book, you'll be tempted to smack yourself in the head and say, duh, how obvious. Newt has never been shy about promoting bold ideas, nor has he ever been accused of being anything less than a patriot. In this new book, you will find some bold but practical solutions that will move this country forward economically. As Newt says near the end of the book, America needs a breakout movement, a new politics that is less about the right versus the left than about the future versus the past. It will require a new political language, new coalitions of pioneers and champions who understand the importance of breaking out, and new assertiveness in exposing the prison guards of the past. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming both a pioneer and a champion, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich.
Thank you. One of the great aspects of coming back to the Reagan Library is the extravagant introduction and then the warm welcome. And so you all make me feel and make Calista feel very much at home. We do want to apologize. Our airplane landed literally 3 hours late. I want to commend our driver who got up here faster than I thought possible at that time of the day. It's an argument for HOV lanes, I guess. But anyway, I apologize for keeping you waiting. It is great to be back here. I should say, by the way, in terms of some of the things that Calista and I have done, that one of the people that we are really fondest of in the work we've done together is here tonight, Kevin Knobloch, who has been our director for 7 documentaries, and we're just thrilled to be back with Kevin. And one of them, by the way, is on Ronald Reagan, called Rendezvous with Destiny. And I think it's particularly appropriate to talk about breakout here, because in 1964, in October, when Reagan made his first great national television speech, at that time on behalf of Barry Goldwater, He says towards the very end of the speech, it is not about right versus left. It is about up or down. Down towards the totalitarian system, the serfdom, the slavery, up towards individual liberty and individual opportunity. And I think, in a sense, Breakout is a very Reaganite book in that it captures something that he understood very, very well. And one of my major goals is to replace right versus left with future versus past. And I think you'll see why in the next few minutes. You know, two of our greatest leaders, Abraham Lincoln and Ronald Reagan, exemplify personally in their lives the concept of breakout. In Lincoln's case, he is 23 years old when he first runs for the state legislature in Illinois. Now, in 1829, the modern railroad engine is built by Stephenson in Great Britain. The first engine's called the Rocket. In 1831, the first engine arrives as imported from Great Britain. In 1832, Lincoln, at 23 years of age, runs for the state legislature. Now, he has never seen a train, but he's read about it. And so in his platform, he calls for a railroad because he's figured out that on the Great Plains of Illinois, that trains would make an enormous difference. And he was a very big advocate of what they would have called improvements, of building a better future, increasing the wealth of the nation. And Lincoln went on to become a railroad attorney. He won a very important case in which a steamboat had hit a railroad bridge. And the steamship company was suing the railroad for having created an artificial obstruction. And Lincoln actually proved that the captain of the steamboat was drunk and won the case. It was a very important case. Lincoln was moderately wealthy by 1858 as a railroad attorney. When he debates Douglas in 1858 in the Senate race, he is riding around Illinois on a railroad. He's also brilliantly using the daily newspapers, which were an invention of two things. The two things came together to make daily newspapers possible. One was the rotary press, so you could print fast enough to produce a newspaper. The other was the telegraph, so that enough news came in to justify a daily paper. And Lincoln was absolutely brilliant at understanding how to exploit what was the cutting-edge technology of his generation. As in 1859, he goes to Council Bluffs, Iowa. He looks out over the Missouri, and he says, someday we have to have a transcontinental railroad to bind the country together, to bring California and the East together. 10 years later, the railroad was completed, and they drove the Golden Spike in Utah. During the Civil War, he was passionate about technology, did everything he could to ensure that the Union forces had the most advanced technology. He is the only president to have a patent in the entire history of the country. He patented a device actually for righting steamboats if they capsized. So Lincoln had lived all this. Reagan is very similar. Reagan's born in 1911. The first commercial airline flight in the United States is 3 years later. When Reagan's 3 years old, a plane goes from St. Petersburg to Tampa, Florida, takes 23 minutes, and never gets above 50 feet over the bay. Those of you who've been to Tampa, St. Pete, you can imagine this. This is the first commercial flight. By the time Reagan is 20 years, or is actually 10 years old, we have the first commercial radio station, WKDKA, in Pittsburgh. His first big successful job is in radio, first in eastern Iowa and then in Des Moines. Reagan goes on. The first talkie is made in 1928. Reagan goes into the movies when talkies are about 8 years old. He's in the movies at the very beginning of Technicolor. He then gets into television, which is He's 35 when television becomes commercially available. And then ultimately he is on color television, which did not even exist when he first went into television. So, and finally as president, he reports to the nation on the explosion of the shuttle Challenger. So again, when Reagan talked about you ain't seen nothing yet, and when Reagan talked about progress, he had personally in his lifetime lived through it. I was up at the ranch when we were filming Rendezvous with Destiny. And on the wall at the ranch is Reagan in the late 1930s in a U.S. Army Cavalry Reserve unit riding horses. So he literally lived in his lifetime from the speed of the horse cavalry, which he not only portrayed in movies, but he served it. And he's a very serious person about this stuff. Has studied a great deal about the military to see all of modern capabilities. So imagine being president, looking at what America was capable of in the 1980s, having in the back of your mind, having served as a junior officer in a cavalry unit with horses. And so again, he'd lived through a series of things that justified being called a breakout by any reasonable standard. Now, what I'm really struck with, I first got into working on this, in fact, in 1981. Dick Cheney was then the policy committee chairman for the House Republicans. And in the summer of '81, he came back from a meeting with David Stockman, who was Reagan's director of the budget. And Cheney laid out for me what the long-term problems financially for the U.S. were. You know, what was going to happen to the share of gross domestic product, to health care, and to retirement programs, and so forth. And I looked at these numbers, which were all very large and very sobering, and I said, it is impossible to solve this problem within the framework of the current system. You will never have the political authority to apply the level of pain that a normal solution would require. In 1981. In the mid-1990s, having written the contract with America and won the first majority in 40 years, we made the decision to balance the federal budget. And we imposed it. The news media thought it was hopeless. The Clinton White House initially resisted it totally. Then we got into a fight about whether to do it for real or whether to do it as a phony device. It took 2 shutdowns of the government to get their attention. It was a very rough and tumble fight. There's a very funny scene which they showed on CNN the other night when we were looking at the State of the Union. You can see it's in January of '96 after the shutdown. President Clinton comes in, and as you know, the president comes in and he always hands a copy of the speech to the vice president and to the Speaker of the House. So if you watch, anytime they come in, there's this formal transmission of the text. And so he gives Gore a copy of the speech, and he hands me a much smaller envelope. And I opened it, and it said, to Speaker Newt Gingrich from President William Jefferson Clinton, you are right, I resign. And I'm reading and breaking up laughing. I show Gore. Clinton turns around and goes, oh, I gave you the wrong envelope. Takes it back. And frankly, if the current president had a little bit of a sense of humor, we get a lot more done in Washington. It's helpful to be dealing with human beings, even if you disagree at times, and to recognize each other's humanness. But how, you know, we produced the only 4 consecutive balanced budgets in your lifetime. Now, how do we do it? First, we passed welfare reform. And welfare reform, by the time we passed it, initially proposed by Ronald Reagan in the 1966 governor's race, passed by us in 1996. By the time we passed it, 92% of the country agreed that it had to be reformed, including 88% of the people on welfare. It is the most successful social reform in your lifetime. More people left poverty. We reduced the number of children in poverty by a larger number in the late 90s than at any other time in American history. And it is astonishing to me to watch Barack Obama, whose policies have pushed people into poverty, dare to talk about inequality when it is his government's policies which guarantee inequality by crippling the poor and trapping them into bad programs. We've had a 50-year experiment. In 1964, on January 8th, Lyndon Baines Johnson and the State of the Union said, we are going to declare war on poverty. In October of 1964, Ronald Reagan said, big government is hopelessly destructive. Now, we've run a 50-year experiment. As Reagan said one time, we declared war on poverty and poverty won. It is impossible to look at the $16 trillion government bureaucrats have spent on the war on poverty and not reach a conclusion this is a profoundly misguided project, and that bureaucrats are incapable of achieving the level of change needed for people to rise and the people to get out of poverty. By contrast, the Reagan programs of less regulation, lower taxes, more entrepreneurship, speaking well of small business, created more jobs than any other program in modern times, and actually peaked in the Clinton years. We passed the largest capital gains tax cut in American history while I was Speaker. And it worked exactly as Reagan said it would. We also opposed unnecessary regulations, and it worked exactly as Reagan said it would. You now find yourself trapped in the longest period of bad economy since the Great Depression, and it's not an accident. You have a dumb tax policy with a dumb bureaucracy, with dumb programs in general, led by a man who is totally tone deaf and has no clue about how America operates. And this is a huge problem. So, we looked at all this. I have to say, by the way, how many of you were surprised at the size of the Seattle victory? Okay, I mean, I had tweeted yesterday in one of those idiotic moments that you realize looking back that I actually thought the best offense, because of the caliber of the quarterback for Denver, that I thought that Denver would win. And if you had said to me one team was going to have this big a margin, I would have bet it was Denver. And I sat there last night, some friends had invited us over, and I was just totally fascinated. I mean, it was like watching a gigantic train wreck. And every time, I mean, it started when the first play from center turned out, to go into the end zone. Luckily, it was recovered by Denver, and so it was only a safety for 2 points, at which point they have to kick. But you watch this thing happening all evening. And I will share with all of you, it was the second largest surprise I have lived through in the last 2 years, the other one being election night. And, I mean, last night I can at least justify, because I don't know what I'm doing in pro football. Calista and I have one share of Green Bay stock, so we know that we're for Green Bay and the rest becomes confusing. And so we actually didn't quite have, we didn't have a team in this particular game. But there's a certain parallel. I did not know until 5:30 on election night, when Calista and I listened into a Frank Luntz call in which he outlined the exit polls. I mean, up until that point, all the patterns I knew in the past, how bad the economy was, et cetera, said to me, in the end, people won't reelect Obama. And we had violated two rules. I mean, looking back, and I spent, the people at Gingrich Productions that Calista runs, and we literally assigned a team to spend a year looking, not just at 2012, but the last time Republicans had a significant margin was 1988, which was really, I would argue, was Ronald Reagan's third election. And we have not since then. I mean, the 2004 re-election is the smallest re-election margin in modern times. And so this has really been now a very long period in which we prove every 4 years we don't know what we're doing. but we spend an enormous amount of money proving it. I mean, it's astonishing how much money was spent badly in 2012. And it was spent badly by well-meaning people because all of their models are wrong. I keep telling people, if your airplane keeps hitting mountains, maybe the radar's not working. You know, there's a pretty profound model here. And so we looked very seriously at what went wrong. First of all, the Republicans had forgotten two major lessons, one taught by Jack Kemp and the other taught by Margaret Thatcher. Kemp's lesson was they have to know that you care before they care that you know. If people don't believe you care about them, they couldn't care less what your argument is. And we ended up in a situation, without getting into personalities, where we were running a campaign which wrote off half the country. We as a party have been indifferent. I give Reince Priebus, by the way, a lot of credit. He has worked diligently to broaden this party, to reach out, to create a new opportunity, and I think he's very serious about us becoming a dramatically more competitive party. But the second argument, one which Ronald Reagan thoroughly believed in, was Margaret Thatcher, who said, first you win the argument, then you win the vote, which of course was Reagan's entire career. Well, we didn't communicate to people we cared about them, and we didn't win the argument. And yet people like me were stupid enough, I thought we could win the election. And so we really took a lot of time to dig into what went wrong and to think about it. And when we got done, instead of issuing one of those reports that says, here are the 11 things that were wrong, we spent another 6 months saying, okay, if this is true, then what would a solution be? And breakout is the beginning of explaining a solution. It's a very simple model. Think about a watershed. I always use the example of the Olympia rainforest. Clouds come in off the Pacific. As they start to go up the mountains, they drop all the rain, and you have a genuine temperate rainforest. On the eastern side of the mountains, you have a rain shadow, and so there's almost no rain. So it's really important to know which side of the mountains you're on, because one side you better carry a canteen, the other side you better carry a raincoat. And you look fairly stupid if you reverse it. I mean, somebody walking around eastern Washington in a raincoat saying, but doesn't it rain every day, would be proof that they were geographically not very competent. Well, I would argue that we are in a watershed moment that for Americans, not Republicans, but for Americans of every background, offers an opportunity to change the game so decisively that it will be remarkable. And it's created by what we've called pioneers of the future. Everywhere you turn in this country, there are people doing really smart things. Some of them are big, some of them are small, but there's just an enormous range. Self-driving vehicles, regenerative medicine that allows us to take your cells, grow them, and put them back in you. So instead of having a transplant, you have basically a replant, which is just an extraordinarily different thing. The ability to do brain research, which is presently going to have breakthroughs in autism, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, mental health, and a host of other areas. Online learning, whether it's the Khan Academy, which has 10 million visitors a month and is free, or it's Udacity, which is a new firm which has just signed a contract with Georgia Tech to take a $70,000 master's degree in computing and offer it for $7,000 online, taking 90% out of the cost of tuition. Every time you turn around, there are cool things going on. Now, let me give you an example, which I'll bet almost all of you have. How many of you have a smartphone of some kind? Just raise your hand if you have a smartphone as opposed to an old-fashioned cell phone. Come on, raise your hand. I want to look around here. Okay. About 75% of you. Okay. If you turn this off, it's useless. Because it's actually not this device. This device is an intersection with the world. And it's the world that is amazing. So, for example, how many of you no longer carry a map in your car? I mean, think about how big a change this is, right? I mean, how many of you use GPS? You're going to go somewhere, you just punch it in, right? Doesn't that strike you as amazing? Now, and it's not because it's small. I mean, it takes a worldwide satellite system to allow you to downlink, but I still find it magic. I mean, we were actually in Avignon, France, last August with some friends of ours who live there, who were trying to take us back to our hotel and got lost. And they were trying to figure out how to get on Lost, and Callista just plugged it into her smartphone. And the GPS told them exactly how to get back to our hotel. And I mean, this is beyond me. So you now have all these apps. How many of you have more than 15 apps on your phone? Okay. Yeah, it's unending. Now, here's why this matters. This is the #1 public health tool of the 21st century. It is the #1 educational tool of the 21st century. It is going to be the #1 tool for rethinking government. And let me explain why. This is symbolically, and then I just noticed, by the way, I think it was in the president's interview with Bill O'Reilly. The source, I may be wrong about the source. Sometime in the last 48 or 72 hours, they got talking about that the Federal Communications Commission is now going to put computers in 15,000 schools. And the president was waxing eloquent about all these kids would be sitting there using these computers. And I'm going to write on this in the very near future. Exactly wrong. I advocated giving every child a laptop in 1995 when I testified at the Ways and Means Committee, and Angus King, then the independent governor of Maine, actually gave every 7th and 8th grader a laptop. But here's why the president's model is exactly wrong, and it's an example of crossing this watershed going from the old order to the new order. I want the kids to have something which is mobile, personal, virtual, and digital. I want them to be able to learn 24/7. And I want to liberate them from an obsolete Carnegie unit model of how many hours you sat, which is how we currently give credit. And I want to teach them that when they want to learn something, there is a world of information out there. I mean, Cliss and I go through this all the time. She's now working on volume 4 of Ellis the Elephant, who is her pachyderm who goes through history teaching 4 to 8-year-olds about American history. Yankee Doodle Dandy just came out. Is about the American Revolution. Volume 4 is going to be From Sea to Shining Sea. And we were having a discussion the other day about whether or not in a particular map we should include the Russian occupation of Northern California. And we went online and Googled it. And it turned out they don't build a fort till 1812, and From Sea to Shining Sea ends in 1809, so the Russians don't get to be in that book. But, you know, it wasn't because I have a PhD in history, although I did once teach history. But it's the world of knowledge is so unbelievable now. And it leads to a totally different way of thinking. If you've got a sixth grader who's brilliant and they can do calculus, should that be a sign that they probably need Ritalin because they're going to be really bored and they're going to be causing trouble because they're sitting in a class that they already understood when they were 4? Or should we find a way to liberate them to learn as much as they can, as fast as they can, to be the most competitive people on the planet, to liberate the sense of entrepreneurship, and to say to every American, you've been endowed by your Creator with the right to dream. And you have the right to pursue happiness, and we want to be the people who say to every American of every ethnic background in every neighborhood, you have the right to think you are an American. This is a paraphrase of Reagan's first inaugural as president, where he talked about this. I mean, his answer to Jimmy Carter's malaise was, fire Carter. You know, Carter is saying, gee, the whole country's going to have to learn how to suffer. He says, no. Why should we suffer because you're incompetent? Let me just carry 1 or 2 steps further so you understand how big this is. Dr. Burgess, who's a congressman from Texas, has 8 medical apps on his smartphone. He can do an EKG. I mean, if we would liberate the system, we would reduce the cost of Medicare and Medicaid while improving the outcomes, giving people control over their own lives, enabling them to do things so that they don't have to go to nursing homes. We would dramatically extend independent living, and we would do it literally while lowering cost and improving health. And you go and try to explain this to bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. I've told people, trying to negotiate with the Congressional Budget Office over new ideas is like debating the theory of flight and having a government bureaucrat explain to you that, yeah, the Wright brothers may be onto something, but, you know, it's only been 111 years so far, and we shouldn't rush into judging this thing, while you're sitting on a 747 on the way nonstop from Washington to Los Angeles. And you just want to kill the guy. I mean, you're thinking, how idiotic do you have to be? Well, if you look at the Congressional Budget Office scoring of Obamacare, it is justification for closing the office as an insult to every American because they were off by such a huge margin. And there's a point where you have to just say enough. I'm going to leave you one last example of how powerful the future is going to be. If you are an American Express card holder, about 0.03 of the company's transactions are fraud, 0.03 of 1%. If you're a taxpayer, over 10% of Medicaid in New York State is a fraud. So you are 330 times more likely to pay for fraud in New York State Medicaid than with American Express. Now, this is not a problem just with Medicaid. Last year, the Internal Revenue Service sent $4 billion in refunds to people who shouldn't have gotten them. They sent, this is my favorite, they sent 353 checks to one address in Shanghai. Now, you just say to yourself a minute, you shouldn't laugh until I tell you that line. It undermines my sense of security. I do think, by the way, this is the kind of story that Reagan, when he was campaigning, would have just gotten such a big kick out of. So think about this. Here's a bureaucracy so stupid. It's not that they sent one check, two checks, three checks. They sent 353 checks to the same address in Shanghai. They sent over 650 checks to Lithuania. There's a town in North Carolina that has one particular building that got so many checks, which were sent, by the way, this is a term in the Internal Revenue Service that they have technically approved, to unregistered aliens. That means you're here illegally. You can get a refund as an unregistered alien, and one particular building in a town in North Carolina, if it actually had all the people who got checks, would have been 38% of the population of the town in one building. There are buildings in Atlanta which got between 12 and 17,000 checks. Now, this is incompetence on a grand scale, which of course led you into the whole Obamacare website and the whole notion that they've discovered recently, by the way, that if you can finally get through and get registered, there is no way you can amend it. So they now have thousands of people who are trying to change whatever they did, and they can't change it because the system doesn't allow for changes. I mean, this is just going to be, Barack Obama, by the time he is done, will have been the greatest educator on the failure of liberalism and the failure of big government in American history. People will look back and think, that was the decisive moment when we understood it was hopeless. Now, this is the closing thing I want to say, and then we're going to toss it open, and Joanne's going to help me take questions from a variety of people here. Because this is part of this whole question. Why is the federal government so incompetent that my guess is, and this is based, we did a book a few years ago called Stop Paying the Crooks, which we actually thought might have an impact in Washington. Nobody paid any attention. I mean, you know, it's true. I mean, true Republicans and Democrats. It was truly bizarre. I mean, my guess is we lose at least $200 billion a year paying people who shouldn't be paid. That means if you're the Budget Committee and you're trying to find $1 trillion over 10 years, if you just reduce the incidence of paying crooks by 50%, and didn't go whole hog like for 90 or 95, that's hard. Just go for half. I mean, could we stop paying half the crooks? You get your $1 trillion and you don't hurt anybody who's honest. And you just cannot penetrate either party. They're both impervious to it. And the reason is they're on the wrong side of the watershed. So here's my closing analogy. The civil service model that led to modern bureaucracy is about an 1880s model. 1880 is around the 20th anniversary of the manual typewriter. So when you hear people say we're going to reform the Pentagon, what they're really saying is we're going to get a slightly faster, better manual typewriter. Because nobody's had the nerve yet to say, you know, our problem is we need to rethink the system from the ground up. Hierarchical, bureaucratic structures of permanent employees based on paper don't work. And that means this is going to be, I met with a bunch of students last Friday at the American Enterprise Institute, and I said, these are college students, I said, your generation will be the most creative since the Founding Fathers. Because breakout means you're going to have more opportunities to do more cool things than any generation in American history since the 1780s. And I believe that that's, for me, as somebody who believes in freedom, that is an enormously exciting opportunity. And I believe, as the movement of the future, we can actually draw people from every background, of every age, in every community, and put together an enormous majority in favor of having a leaner, more effective, more modern government with dramatically more freedom for individuals, dramatically more decentralization, and moving into a 21st century system that allows us to leave our competitors around the planet behind once again, as they sit there trying to figure out what it is, why is it the Americans once again are the most dynamic country in the world. So I look forward to your questions.
Okay, we have one rule here. In order to ask a question, you'll need to be on a microphone, unlike my microphone. So we're going to start over here.
Mr. Speaker, as you travel across the country and you talk with people, do you get a sense that they understand the failure of what's taking place in politics today beyond just the Republican Party? Do people from all sides realize it to the point that we might see a change in the White House of a different party come next time around?
Well, look, I think first of all, you're going to see a change at many levels, not just the White House. Callista and I were very fortunate. We had the opportunity in December to go to Amherst. And Amherst is arguably one of the most liberal campuses in the country. We had 750 people in the auditorium. They turned away 200. They gave me a standing ovation walking in. I talked for about an hour and took questions for about an hour, and they gave me a standing ovation walking out, and they were very generous to both Callista and me in the whole visit. And I would have said to you 3 or 4 years ago it wouldn't have been possible. But I sense what's happening is, and people shouldn't be confused. Let me be very clear about this, because this is what Reagan was all about. Ronald Reagan was not a normal, regular Republican. Ronald Reagan was an FDR Democrat who understood that communism was a great danger, government was too big, and we had to somehow create a majoritarian coalition. In our film, which the Reagan Library was very helpful with, there's a scene where Reagan is invited up in '76 to address the convention by Jerry Ford. And Reagan's opening line is, my fellow Republicans and those Democrats and independents beyond this hall who really share our dreams. And Reagan understood over and over again. So I would say to you that the people who are fed up with Obama don't necessarily want regular Republicans reverting to regular Republican behavior. They're looking for an idea-oriented, they want the message of a time for choosing 1964 with Reagan. They do not want normal Republican consultant baloney. And we need to understand that. They don't want a party that can jump up and yell no to Obamacare and have no ideas about replacing it. And so I think we've got to realize that there's a huge challenge for us. And I will say, I mean, recently, for example, Senator Coburn and Senator Burr and others introduced a bill that's a serious effort. Things are moving, but it's not an automatic right-left. It really is a fundamentally different tone.
Okay, right here.
Mr. Speaker, hello?
There you go.
Hi, Mr. Speaker. Just curious on your point of view on term limits in Congress.
Well, I actually think they're relatively irrelevant. We did impose term limits on being chairman, and that's actually worked. I could personally live with 12-year term limits because that's long enough that you have some people come in and learn the trade. But if you look at Sacramento, the term limits in Sacramento mean that the lobbyists and the bureaucrats now run the city. I mean, I don't think the citizen representation in Sacramento's worked out very well. It also means that all the guys who are in one house spend all their time trying to figure out how to get in the other one. And so I'm not sure that the term limits have worked as well as they could have. I think part of the answer is a very simple reform that says any candidate can raise any amount as long as they report it every night. And if you had that simple campaign reform, then middle-class candidates could raise the money to beat incumbents, and you'd have a very different environment out there.
Back here.
Mr. Speaker, sir, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Will you run again? We need you back in. We need you as president. We're tired of what's out there.
Well, the candid answer is we came out of the campaign with a pretty large debt. And unless we could find a way to pay the debt off, it would be irresponsible to try to run again. And so that's a practical thing we'd have to do before we could run.
Over here.
I'd be curious what you think about the Tea Party, and would you please elaborate on that?
Okay. Well, I'm not known for giving unelaborate answers. Look, I think the Tea Party movement was an enormously healthy response to the overwhelming drive of Pelosi and Reid and Obama. And I think you have to go back and look at the degree to which they were running over the country in 2009 and 2010. And I think that the Tea Party movement was a genuine populist uprising of people who were fed up. And I think they've been healthy for the country. I think they've been healthy for the Republican Party. I think all these folks who wring their hands and worry about them, the Tea Parties had nothing to do with the loss of the presidency last year. Nothing. And in fact, their message was probably closer to the American people than the message of Republican consultants. But I also think there's a healthy tension. I mean, you have sort of an establishment wing of the Republican Party. These are the people who are against Reagan. And you have a grassroots movement over here. But you also have millions of people who don't belong to either one. I mean, you have a country right now that is searching. And that's why I think it's going to be intriguing to watch. And it's also why I think probably that First Lady, Senator, Secretary Clinton may have a harder general election campaign than anybody. I mean, I think she will win the Democratic nomination, but then, frankly, I thought she was going to win in 2008. So I'm not a very good judge because it took an amazingly bad campaign on her part and a remarkably good campaign by Obama for her to lose. But she probably now has such a huge advantage that barring some really catastrophic behavior, she's probably going to be the Democratic nominee. I think she's going to find a very hard time winning the general election because you can't have been a McGovern field person in 1972 and have been a national figure since 1992 and wander in and be the new face that's going to change Washington.
I think we have a question back here.
Mr. Speaker, we see throughout the last couple of years how President Obama has been shredding the Constitution. The pundits on TV, the politicians in Washington denounce him for it, say what he's doing, but none of them say, what can we do about it? And by the way, President Obama is not a constitutional expert. He was an instructor at a law school teaching constitutional law. Can we do anything to stop what he is doing?
Sure. I mean, look, the first practical thing is to do everything you can to elect a Republican Senate this fall. I mean, elections have consequences. The second thing, which I think the House Republicans are doing a moderately good job of, is to keep having hearings and keep demanding documents and continue to stay on offense. I would probably be a lot more aggressive about using the regular appropriations process to shrink and weaken the administration. I mean, I think there are a lot of steps you can take that are short of closing the government that nonetheless weaken their ability to do things. Various riders you can put on bills that people would not understand why the president was opposing it. But I think the center of gravity this year is very simple. It is the Senate Democrats who are up for re-election. And if you watched their reaction to the State of the Union, you had 5 or 6 of them who were saying things that sounded like they'd been written by the Senate Republican Campaign Committee. I mean, these folks are all scared, and they all understand that it's not going to get better this year. It's going to get worse. And the anger is going to be worse. And so I think that there's a real opportunity here to really drive all year, not just wait for the election, but to force them again and again to either vote with people back home or with Obama, and just continue to create that kind of tension. We, by the way, did that in 1980. We helped set the stage for Reagan. I was a freshman. I was the only Republican elected from Georgia. Jimmy Carter of Georgia was president. Can I tell you just one funny story about that period that illustrates what happens? So I get elected. I'm literally the only Republican in the Georgia delegation. If you watch the other day, there is a tradition that immediately after the leadership, that actually that when the president comes in, the first 2 members who follow the president are the senior members of the Democrat and Republican delegation from his home state. So you'd have, for example, with President Obama, you'd have had the senior Republican and the senior Democrat from Illinois follow him in the chamber for the State of the Union. So I get elected in '78, and in January of '79, the Sergeant at Arms announces the President of the United States. A friend of mine who'd helped advise me in the campaign was at home, as he told me later, laying on the couch drinking a beer. He sees Jimmy Carter walk in, and immediately behind him, because I am the senior Republican in the delegation, because I am the only Republican in the delegation. And he just said this. He said, "This is impossible." He said, you can't have risen that fast. And I had to explain to him the arcane rules. The reason I thought of it was this. In 1980, we kept the Democrats off balance so badly that there was one evening when they could not adjourn the House because a third of the Democrats joined us in voting no. And just to send a signal of how disgusted they were with the Clinton White House. And I think you could see by this summer, if the Senate Republicans will follow a strategy of working with the House Republicans, they can set up vote after vote where the Democrats who are up for re-election are in agony every single day because they either have to vote with the president and get people back home mad at him, or they vote with the folks back home and have the White House go crazy. And I think that you could see that rhythm set up sometime this spring.
We have one right here.
Speaker, my name is Archie Corvin, and I'm 93 years old, from the Greatest Generation crowd. And I married a lady. I think this is old homecoming night because I married a lady from Carrollton, Georgia, and was there for several years, and she attended your 1995 inauguration in Washington, D.C.
Well, thank you.
I wish she could be with us tonight, but she passed away last year. But I've been thinking a lot, and I've been to several of these meetings in the last year, and it seems like everyone is thinking along the same lines. How do we as a Republican Party increase our diversity and at the same time retain our core values? Thank you an awful lot. And by the way, my son in Atlanta at Fox News interviewed you several times when you were in office. His name was Tom Corbin. Thank you a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think, not only do I not think there's nothing wrong with our core values, and this goes back to Reagan again, but I think our core values explained within the context of people's lives offer them a dramatically better future than the old order does. I mean, that's a key part of how we have to think about this. And part of the reason we talk about breakout and we want people to look at the smartphone and look at all these other things is if we can come along and we can literally offer people a dramatically better future than in the tradition of Walmart or McDonald's or any other great American competitive system, or for that matter, Apple. Remember, you all of a sudden have people who as consumers say, yeah, that's the world I want to live in. And I would argue that our values, combined with an understanding of the technological revolution that's underway, allows us to offer 80 or 85% of the American people a better future than anybody in the old order can offer them. But it requires us both to follow the Kemp rule and the Thatcher rule. First, to listen to people and understand what it is they want. I mean, if we don't understand the lives of the people we're talking to, the fact that we talk in some abstract theory about free enterprise to somebody who's never had a job, has nobody in their family who's had a job, has no idea what this means. And sometimes you got to go back and got to start at the beginning and you got to teach people the basics. But I do believe that there's a country out there that is very eager to believe the future can be better than anything that big government can deliver. And I think every day big government right now is teaching us how incompetent and how obsolete it is and how impossible it is to run an effective big government. In fact, Obama himself said it when he was explaining why the website didn't work. He said, the campaign could do things that were efficient and clear, and federal regulations make it impossible. Now, I don't think he actually listened to himself. But if he had heard himself, he would have understood how really smart he was, and he would have applied that across the board. I mean, that basic principle applies to the Defense Department, the Veterans Administration, the Department of Labor, the IRS, you name it. They are now trapped in an old order, but we have to get people who want change to understand the new language and go out and campaign on it and develop it. And I think we could have a remarkable election this fall and an even bigger election in 2016.
Okay, we have one over there.
Thank you for being here tonight. Can you hear me all right? Okay.
Sure.
I think most of us probably watched the State of the Union address last week. I suspect even more of us wish that you were the one that were delivering that address to. And my question is this, Mr. Speaker, I would love to know what is your State of the Union, the real union, and what do you recommend we do as a nation to get there?
Look, I think that we are suffering from, we're at the end, well, I shouldn't say, nothing in life is certain, all right? There's every reason to believe that we could be at the end of the literally 80-year cycle that began in 1932, in which bigger and bigger government was seen as a solution. And we could be at that end because it is so clearly objectively failing, and because all the new breakthroughs, all the new pioneers of the future are creating so many opportunities that the gap is getting wider every week. And so just normal everyday people are looking at, I always tell students, for example, look at the accuracy with which you get money out of an automatic teller machine anywhere in the world. And then compare that with the IRS sending out $4 billion because it's too stupid. I mean, there is a point here where the gap gets so big that despite Republican incompetence and despite the news media's passion for Obama, the whole system just starts to break down. And I think we're very close to that. So I think the State of the Union is indeterminate right now. Excuse me. If we allow the old order to stay in power, it will eventually grind the country down. I mean, Detroit was not an abstraction. The city of Detroit in 1950 is the wealthiest single city in the United States and has 1,800,000 people. It's now around 700,000 and ranks, I think, 67th. Well, that's all just politics. It's just bad government. I mean, Sacramento is filled with really bad people doing really bad things. And none, you know, Albany's worse. I mean, Albany doesn't have, Albany doesn't have the weather. And its corruption is more deeply entrenched and of an older order. But the fact is, none of these systems give up voluntarily. You know, the Democrats didn't walk in 94 and say, you know, we're really tired after 40 years. Would you like to run the House for a little while? We had to knock them down and take power. And so part of the purpose of writing Breakout is in the hopes that all of you will actually read it and think about it, is to try to create a new sense of where we are and where we're going. And one of the things that's been really fun from my perspective, both in making the films that Cliff and I have made with Kevin, which are consistently patriotic and communicate key values, but also as she launches this series of books for 4 to 8-year-olds on patriotism, she's writing about the past that has made us so remarkable. I'm trying to write about what we should do as citizens to make sure that when the children who are reading her books grow up, they inherit a country that is as exceptional as the country she's writing about. And it gives us a remarkable partnership in trying to communicate with people and trying to get these ideas across. But this, you cannot go back, and just to build on Reagan for 1 minute, you can't go back to 1964 and imagine the end of the Soviet Empire. You can't go back to 1964 and imagine the victory of supply-side economics. I mean, these things weren't ordained. I mean, there was a very real possibility after the 76 defeat, and I think Reagan, in Detroit, or in Kansas City rather, after he lost, I think Reagan didn't think he'd run again. And there's a very real possibility he could have stayed home. He had a pretty good retirement opportunity. So history is made by free people who will themselves to take risks and will themselves to do things that are improbable. And out of that process, they save a nation. And I think the purpose of Breakout is to say to each one of you, you know, and I'll be up front with you, any of you who later on, if you read it and you think it's important and you want to share it with people, and similarly, if you read Cliff's books and you want lots of kids to get them, we're prepared to work with the library here on bulk orders, and I'm personally prepared to personalize every book you want to send to people. We had an auto dealer in Miami who for some reason decided to send out 286 copies the other day. But I mean, this is how Goldwater's conservative spread is that people said, you know, this is important. Now, I think the message of Breakout is the most important thing I've done in my career, more important than the contract, because I think that this is a country right at the edge, and if they get the language and they get the opportunity, they are going to wipe out a generation of politicians in both parties, and they're going to say, we want to go into the future, and if you don't want to go in the future with us, you need to retire now. And I think that's really what I hope we will get done in the next couple of years.
So we have time for one more question. We're going to go back here. No pressure to the person asking it. You have the final question.
Well, that was really a great question. I thank you for doing that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming out tonight. I appreciate love hearing from you because I'm a big fan of yours, have been for years. I wish you'd run for office again. Do you think with all the failures in the liberal government and the Tea Partiers coming out that the Republican Party is going to get it, what they need to do in the next election, or do you think there'll be a breakout of a third party?
No, I mean, first of all, I think third parties historically are pretty impractical. The only one that has succeeded was the Republican Party, and that required both the death of the Whigs and a civil war, so it's a pretty expensive proposition. I want to go back just for a second. I mean, Reince is a good friend of ours. Calista is from Wisconsin. Reince is from Wisconsin. We've known him a long time. I actually think what he's trying to do is historic. I think he gets it. He understands, and again, you can't, I'm not going to suggest that any one person is going to change all this. we have a lot of governors who are moving in the right direction. We have a lot of younger members of the House and Senate who are moving in the right direction. I've been involved in, I met with 25 House members on the Energy and Commerce Committee Monday, and I was very encouraged by the attitude and the tone. I met with 60 staff from that committee on last Friday. I met with 3 U.S. senators on Monday to talk about moving the Senate Republicans. I mean, I sense, you know, it's a long way yet. This is closer to 64 than it is to the end of the Soviet Empire in 91. But I do think that there are a lot of people who want to move in the right direction. I do think the potential is there to do it. I had a remarkable meeting with Eric Cantor the other day where I was frankly very impressed with how much he gets the idea that we've got to move across the watershed and we've got to take up these new ideas and these new approaches. And so I'm moderately encouraged. I'll give you one last example. Kathy McMorris Rogers, who responded to the president the other night, and I thought in a relatively short period of time was dramatically more coherent than Obama. She visited Google a couple months ago as chairman of the conference. And so they have literally, the first time I walked in, I was really surprised. These are the only, if you go to the Cannon Building, if you're back in Washington, the House Republican Conference offices have been redesigned and repainted to resemble Google. And the reason she's done it is she wants to get across to every Republican staffer and every Republican member when they walk in, this is a new world. So don't come in here and explain how the thing you did 12 years ago is going to work, because we got to really confront how different it is. I believe, and in California it is similar, there will come a morning when you will see somebody emerge who will figure out how to offer the people of California a dramatically better deal than they're going to get in Sacramento. And that person will figure out a message that unifies Latinos, Asian Americans, African Americans, and Anglos, Caucasians, and it'll come together. Now, it may not come together quickly. I ran 3 times. I lost twice. I lost in Watergate at 48.5%. I lost with Carter at the head of the Democratic ticket in Georgia at 48.3%. I finally won on the 3rd time. I was then asked in December of '78 to set up a planning committee to become a majority. I went to see the chairman of the Congressional Campaign Committee. I said, you know, we've been in the minority for 24 years, and we need a plan to become a majority. And he said, that is a terrific idea. Why don't you chair it? Now, I had not even been sworn in yet. And that's how I got to know Thatcher, and that's how I got to be part of the Reagan team. I mean, because all of a sudden, as a freshman, I had status, because I was in charge of this planning committee, which I had invented. But this is the point, I just want to leave you with this, because I'm not here and gee, this is all going to be easy. We lost in 80, from the standpoint of the U.S. House, we lost in 80, 82, 84, 86, 88, 90, and 92. And Elton can tell you, the night we won in 94, there weren't 10 members on our side who thought we'd win. So I believe breakout will occur. I think we will shatter the old order, because we, the American people, will shatter the old order. I don't think it'll be easy. I don't think they're going to give up. I think they're going to do everything they can. They will cheat every way they can. They will exert every level of muscle they can. But in all of American history, there is no example where the insiders could actually stop the American people once the American people were mobilized. And sooner or later, in God's good time, the American people will take back this country, and we will open up for our children and grandchildren an amazingly better future. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Newt has agreed to sign books this evening. Of course, we have breakout if you do.